Welcome to Warrior Enigma. On today's episode, I get the honor and privilege to sit with a gentleman who spent 35 years working for NASA, is an accomplished author, and has spent decades researching and collecting information on unidentified aerial phenomena. Before we jump headfirst into this segment, a quick note from my good friend and investment wizard, Mr. B.D. Collins. His book, $1,000 to $1 million, Proven Strategies for Triple Leverage ETF Success, has been gaining traction amongst investors seeking to strengthen their portfolio using exchange-traded funds. Here is one of many 5-star reviews from an Amazon customer titled Concrete and Actionable Strategies. And I quote, "I have been looking for a practical book that addresses leveraged ETFs and the fear surrounding them for a long time, until this book came along. It dispels all the myths. Even better, the author offers specific and actionable strategies to start on your investment journey today. This is not a get-rich-quick scam. The strategies require a minimum cash investment, discipline, and consistency for 10, 20, 25 years and see the results for yourself. I own leverage ETFs in my portfolio, and this book gave me confidence and better strategies. Here on Warrior Enigma, I do not give advice, especially regarding finances, but I do encourage personal growth through knowledge. If you seek to grow your financial position, I highly recommend this book as an inexpensive way to expand your knowledge using a proven financial avenue available. Check the link in my bio or in the show's description for purchasing details. Now, the gentleman featured on today's episode worked for NASA either directly or by contract for 35 years, including work on the Gemini and Apollo missions, as well as the International Space Station. His work with light refraction within the human eye, using variable light and geometric shapes to assist astronauts, eventually began him down an unexpected path as he set out to use the same technology to disprove the existence of UFOs. What he did not realize is that the science would ultimately lead him towards their existence and the physics of how they interact specifically with pilots. We talk about his career with NASA, his lifelong hobby of UAP intelligence collection, as well as brief insights to conspiracies such as the moon landing, crop signs, and the recent Virginia drone incident. He is the co-founder of NARCAP, the first ever anonymous UAP reporting website resource for pilots. He is an accomplished author of many genres. Much of his work on UAPs is now archived at Rice University in Texas and is available online. He is a husband, father, and strong Christian man. Warriors, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Dick Haines. Mr. Dick Haines, thanks for joining me here. Welcome to the Warrior Enigma.
It's my pleasure. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, this is great. So for everybody, we met at church, which has just been an absolute blessing. And when I found out your history, we started talking over coffee, right?
Yep.
And I was like, we got to do a podcast. So
Let's do it.
Yeah, it's been a couple of weeks coming, but you have a very, very phenomenal story that I think a lot of people are going to really enjoy hearing. So if you don't mind, we'll just jump right into it and a little bit about what I know with you.
Mm-hmm.
Early on, you did your academia took you to NASA.
Right.
And before all that, though, what is young Dick Haines look like? Where were you at? Where were you at, and what were you doing?
Oh, well, how much time do we have?
Yeah,
Um,
what were you, an athlete? Would you get into sports? Or?
no, I wasn't. My dad was an engineer,
Okay.
civil engineer, and he wanted me to go in business with him. He was a land surveyor,
Okay.
South Seattle. This was just before the Korean War. And I went to the University of Washington in the Department of Engineering, School of Engineering. Finally coming to realize that I wasn't cut out to be an engineer. And I think he was a little disappointed, but that's a story for another time.
Sure.
So I transferred to Pacific Lutheran College in Tacoma in pre-sem,
What is pre-sim?
seminary,
Oh, okay.
become a pastor.
Gotcha.
But I really wasn't a Lutheran yet, but that's a Lutheran school.
Gotcha.
But they let me in anyway. And I graduated in 1960 with a bachelor's degree in psychology. And if you realize psychology doesn't have much of a future academically and without a higher degree.
Okay.
So I applied to graduate schools. I got accepted at 3 and chose Michigan State back in East Lansing, primarily because of the faculty there, the outstanding world-class researchers. And a lot of psychologists go into teaching. Well, that'd be all right, but I really was, I think, cut out for research. And so, make a long story short, 4 more years at Michigan State, PhD in experimental psychology / physiology, dual major. And I applied upon graduation for a postdoc with the National Research Council in Washington, D.C. And I won it. It blew me away. Married by then. Carol and I were in married housing on campus there. And it was a position, 1-year position at Ames Research Center, Moffett Field, California, which is near San Jose on the peninsula south of San Francisco. And at that time, it was just into the middle of the Gemini program, space program, manned space. And they needed somebody to do some simulation work for rendezvous and docking, which is a very precise, challenging job, given the technology of the day. We didn't have computers back then. It was almost HP calculators kind of a thing. At any rate, so I designed and built a laboratory called the High Luminance Vision Laboratory, and it was unique. And I was so thankful to have a sponsor that could afford it.
Right.
And it was basically a surgical Class 100 clean room with a solar simulator not flashing, but delivering real sunlight into this room. And I had to capture the light because if it reflected off anything, the whole room would explode in light.
Okay.
The walls were, 3M developed a paint for us that reflected 1%.
Oh, wow.
It absorbed 99%.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Anyway, did research there for the first year, and the bosses liked it, but I was just a student, basically.
Yeah.
Postdoc.
What does research look like? I mean, I obviously am a little bit ignorant to this style of life because I've known computers dang near my entire life. So when you're talking about light refraction and research on this basis, I mean, what does that really look like? What are you researching? I guess more so, how are you gathering the data?
Okay, that's a good question. The work I did for a doctoral degree was light scatter within the human eye.
Okay.
And this has, I think, some interesting spin-off benefits. Driving a car at night with oncoming headlights, if you have a cataract problem, you can have light scatter within the eye, and the headlights will become just blooming. They will glare, if you will.
Yeah.
The nature of the research basically was taking measurements of the visibility of a probe light, like a star. It would look just like a star at night, on a track that could be moved behind the target and disappeared into the glare.
Okay. And these are mechanical movements.
These are all mechanical.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
There was nothing digital at that time.
Yeah, right.
A long time ago. And when HP, Hewlett-Packard, finally came out with their HP 35 desk calculator, it was a revolution because it did everything but cook breakfast.
Yeah.
It was fantastic. It was really impressive.
So that made your job just phenomenally easier.
Much easier.
Okay.
That's right. And so anyway, after 2 more years of doing research with an extension to my postdoc, I was hired full-time, civil service, NASA, research scientist. And over the years, I've done work in aeronautics, in astronautics. In aeronautics, basically, I was managing a joint FAA, NASA program on developing a head-up display symbology for McDonnell Douglas. They were developing the DC-9-80 at the time. And so we put together a program. I had a team of maybe 15 or so, 10 to 15, in different areas of the optics of a head-up. You know what a head-up display is?
I do, yeah.
Okay. Some people don't, never heard of it.
No, and you know what's crazy is you're talking about like you back at like the conception of heads-up displays.
You know,
and
very early.
Right. And now there's so many heads-up displays in civilian life, like the military has astronomical applications, and I'm sure the aerospace industry does too.
Right.
You can actually buy scuba diving goggles now, just your mask
Yeah.
that has all your air consumptions and all your tables and your depths and everything right on your mask. And it's
Right.
just civilian, a couple $100. They're expensive, but the applications are dang near endless now. So this
Yeah.
is paving the way for all that.
Well, for the DC-9-80,
Sure, yeah.
the Air Force had been using it for some time. World War II, they used them for bomb sites
Okay.
and gun sites. But that's not at all, basically, that's very limited application, I should say, for a head-up display. But for any airline, for instance, on a commercial application at least, who's flying into a 0-0 visibility condition, like the far north, British Columbia, Arctic, where it's fog or it's snow and there's no outline of the runway, the head-up display will put a trapezoid line around the outline of the runway that's hidden under snow, plus other information, lots of practical instrument-related information, so that the pilot can land that airplane based totally on this symbolic information rather than real-world information, without having to look down at the instrument panel. So we measured eye focus and eye movement time, accuracy of landing, and so forth.
That's a lot of data.
Well, it's a lot of data.
Yeah.
That's right. But I'll just digress one moment
Sure.
on the aeronautical part, because I've done other aeronautical projects as well. I had a chance to learn to fly the 737, Boeing 737, up in Vancouver at Pacific Western Airlines, which at the time was third largest in Canada. And two of us went there from California because they had a head-up display mounted in their simulator. And they were training their pilots who flew up to Yellowknife and Alaska and so forth to use this HUD. And so my friend and I spent about a week there every day in the simulator with the chief test pilot in the right seat and one of us in the left seat flying the simulator, talking to the tower and all that stuff. How do you start your engines and take the brakes off and add power and all that stuff? Well, to make a long story short, on the last day before we were supposed to come back from that trip, the chief test pilot, who was our host, asked if we'd like to stay one extra day and fly up to Edmonton over the Rockies, because on a real airplane, and we could go as passengers and just go along and watch the operation of a real airplane with a real HUD under real conditions, except it was a sunny, clear day, fortunately.
Yeah.
It wasn't snow or anything. So I called down to my boss in California and got permission to go ahead. Yes, take the extra day. It'll be worth it. So we did. Arrived at the airport early that next morning, found our way out to the real airplane and went up to the cockpit rather than turning right and sitting in the back. And it was he was flying the airplane in the left seat. A company pilot in his uniform was in the right seat. And John and I were standing behind the two pilots.
Okay.
There was one man in the back, his engineer, twiddling electronic dials on accelerometers and things like that, related to the HUD.
Okay.
And we made, I would estimate a dozen at least over the Rockies at the airport there, about a dozen touch and go, add power and go around. And they got all their tests and everything looked fine. And I was able to look over the shoulder of Russ, because you have to have your eyes in pretty much a little exit pupil. It's called.
Right.
And so I could see the symbology in what he was doing. And then we got done with those test flights, practice flights, if you will. And he turned to me and he said, "How would you like to land this?" And I said, "Sure." I couldn't believe it. He would do that. And so we went like this to the company pilot, who was late in the landing. And I got into the seat, I put the seatbelt on, and I said to myself, I'm in the simulator.
Yeah.
I've been spending a week in it, a very realistic simulator, by the way. And I called the tower and got permission to do another come around in the pattern and come down and made what Russ said. He was probably making this up. He said, I made one of the best landings he's ever seen. I mean, it was right in the right place, at the right speed, at the right vertical rate, and so forth and so on.
And you relied heavily on the HUD for this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But because of my practice with the simulator, right?
For sure, yeah.
So anyway, I come home from that trip the next day, I go out to the local airport, Palo Alto Airport, and bought myself a pilot logbook. And guess what I put my first entry into the
737.
Couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I'm so proud of that. It was great. Great
That's
experience.
Very cool.
So I understand the 7.3. It's overpowered and it's a great airplane.
Yeah.
Great airplane.
Well, it's stood the test of time. And
Yeah, it has.
Yeah.
It's one of their best sellers,
yep,
I think.
absolutely.
So anyway, that's aeronautics. Space, astronautics, as I said, involved Gemini at first, rendezvous and docking primarily. But Ames Research Center, where I worked, had two primary focuses or objectives from headquarters point of view. Each center, there were 7 centers around the country. Each one is assigned certain areas of responsibility. Ames had 2. One of them was aerodynamics. We have the world's largest number of wind tunnels there. I think there's 20 wind tunnels.
Okay.
Huge, some very small, hypervelocity, re-entry, and so forth, to very, very large. The second area is life sciences, and I was in life sciences.
Okay.
So then Apollo comes along. And one of the jobs that I had with a small team was to evaluate the T2 sextant. You know what a sextant is?
I do.
Oh, good. Okay.
Prior Navy guy, there's a few things I picked up. Yeah.
You'd be surprised. People don't.
Yeah.
These days, they don't know what a sextant is.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's basically become obsolete with all the technologies around. So.
Well, this was built in Boston by Colesmorgan, a major optical company. And it was designed exactly for the Apollo program to be used 3 times between Earth and Moon for the Apollo 7, 8, 9, and so forth. They wanted to know how accurate this thing is. And so they assigned this to our small team at NASA Ames. Why? Because we had an Apollo capsule in a big room, big black room, on an air bearing, and you could literally kind of twitch your nose and the whole thing would move a little bit.
Oh, wow.
Because it's on multiple holes underneath this machined base, the spherical base.
Mm-hmm.
And then the bottom of the capsule was perfectly identical to that, solid, and the air pressure would, so you could do this and the whole capsule would move.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I should have brought a photograph. Wore a spacesuit because you will probably be doing many of these measurements through a face plate.
Right.
Well, make another long story short. I discovered the optics of this instrument, this T2 sextant, were, I'd say, perfect.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yes, it is. There's no hysteresis in the gears at all.
Okay. And just for the listeners who don't know what a sextant is, can you just briefly describe it to you? Do a much better job.
Yeah. Okay.
I know, right? I'm picturing it in my head, and I'm like, how would I even describe it?
Well, I think some of your viewers would identify with old sail vessels, three-masted ships, for instance.
And that was the
Royal
first thing that
Navy.
jumped into my mind is maritime navigation.
It's the same thing.
Right.
It's either an octant or a sextant and so forth. It's a device which is handheld. You look through a telescope, you hold it with one hand, and with the other hand you turn a little knob. And as you turn that knob, a prism rotates in the field of view, allowing you to still see the straight ahead, but at the same time it diverts to another direction. And so what you want to do in space is get, like the surface of the moon was what we did, the lunar limb, on one of these lines of sight, and then very carefully pick a particular star that headquarters tells you're supposed to use for navigation purposes, and dial this down and get the exact angle.
Right.
And then you take the time of flight, and they've done all this trig, spherical trig, to work out the details.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's like a protractor if you're measuring geometry.
It is.
But it
That's
you know,
all. That's really
but you're
what it
using
is.
it in 3D versus 2D.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
about all it is.
Okay.
So anyway,
And if anyone Googles it, they would look at it and be like, "Oh, I've seen that like on a TV show."
Sure.
Or like they've been pretty prevalent in a lot of
used
movies.
World
things
War II all the
like,
time.
yeah, exactly. Yep.
Sure. Anyway, the section itself had no error in it. But when I took measurements, we used volunteer young men who could have been astronauts with perfect vision, no problems whatsoever. They weren't astronauts, but they could have been. And we got them all suited up and put them in the capsule and had them take all these measurements, many measurements. We discovered an error. The optics of the object did not have any error. It was light scatter within the human eye. And that's what I'd done my doctoral work on.
Right.
And I'll tell you, when I graduated from Michigan State, I said to myself, I'm never going to find a job. Who needs that kind of stuff? Well, I'll tell you, God was very faithful because he went before me there and planted this idea about light scatter. And I can't tell you where that came from because I don't know. But it worked out into helping the Apollo program get to the moon.
Yeah.
Because we made corrections to their thruster, capsule thruster, to get them back on course 3 times.
Based off all this research that you're describing right now.
Right, simulator research,
Yeah.
right.
I mean,
And it was consistent error. That's the thing. If it had been plus or minus 2 or 3 minutes, they'd average out.
Right.
No, this was always in one direction. And you can't afford to miss the moon by 2 minutes at 230,000 miles.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
Anyone who's trying to, kind of get like an application. So for me, archery,
Same thing.
up close, you miss by 2 degrees and it might be an inch. From 60 yards, you miss by 2 degrees and it might be a foot.
Right.
And then you amplify that 230 miles, 230,000 miles. Like, I mean, you're off on your own trajectory off into the universe.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, that was a good program. I enjoyed that.
I mean, that's a huge thing. That's a huge accomplishment.
Well,
because I mean,
we're all working as a team.
yeah.
NASA was quite different then than it is today. I don't mind saying that because I'm retired now.
Yeah.
But back then it was fledgling, young. President Kennedy had just helped us get started and so forth, making the moon as an objective. And it was almost a family. And I may be extending things a little bit far, but that's how I felt it.
Sure.
That we weren't in competition with anybody. This was all in the same direction to get the job done. And so Houston, which is Johnson Spacecraft Center, well, they had mission control, right? Everybody knows that. And each of the centers around the country contributed their specialty, whatever it was. The heat shield, just for instance, was developed at NASA Ames by our director at the time using one of our wind tunnels, a hypervelocity wind tunnel. And he came up with this heat ablation concept of coming into a dense atmosphere from space at 17,000, 18,000 miles an hour and getting red hot and basically getting rid of the kinetic energy by ablation, basically. That's just one example of many.
Yeah.
That the agency it's a wonderful place to work.
Did you ever run into any issues with, if a main focus is over here, so you have your different specialties, right? When you're putting all that together into one mission, was there ever a time where the calculations for, say, they made this heat shield perfect, but the information known over here about trajectory angle or there was really good communication between these centers?
Yeah, I'd say so. There's some competition.
There would have to be.
There has
I
to
mean,
be.
at least a little bit, right? Because you're talking about fractions that make worlds of a difference.
Right.
In modern society, we have more of a competition or capital-based society where it creates these problems where you're not all working in the same direction.
Right.
And then there's always a breakdown of communication where, and I'm not saying it's always intentional because generally I feel that it's not, but one department will know something and be working on something, and then when you go to implement it for the company, there's conflicting terms as you come together. And so that's kind of what I was wondering, like, especially when you're dealing with re-entry from outer space. I mean, you guys seem to have nailed it.
I don't want to make the agency sound perfect, because it wasn't. It's
Sure.
a government bureaucracy. You know the definition of a bureaucrat?
What's that?
It's a man who cuts the red tape lengthwise. And so we had some of them.
For sure.
But I guess my point is that there was a genuine enthusiasm and excitement back then
Yeah.
for the world, not world, but America working together as a unified patriotism, if you will, for the common good. Because Russia had put up Sputnik. That was the first orbital vehicle, as you know. They were making great breakthroughs, and we weren't. And so from a military political point of view, the government had to do something to show competency, because we were supposed to be the leader of the free world
Right.
from a Cold War point of view. I don't want to get into details, but
Yeah. No.
so NASA played a part in that, and we did it. We landed guys on the moon and got them back.
What do you say to the people who say we never landed people on the moon? It was all propaganda.
I don't waste my time.
Just
I know
not
we
worth
did.
the argument.
I know we did.
Yeah, I mean, it's people like you who have the front and center.
Yeah.
That, like, anyone can have an opinion, and you can find.
Sure.
It's happened. This saying. I mean, it was Pastor Ray said it in service about disproving Christianity. Someone being a Christian. If you look for a reason, more or less, if you look to find dirt, you're going to get dirty, right? Or if you look to disprove anything, you can find some sort of facts that you can twist into. Proving that. So there's a lot of people that still latch on to, we've never been to the moon, but I mean, someone like you who, you had a hand in that cookie jar.
Yeah.
No, that's great.
I've seen some remarkable virtual reality out of Hollywood. The Apollo 13 movie was one example. And one could make the case that some of the scenes were virtual reality, except this was back in the days before virtual reality.
Right.
And how you simulate a 1/5 gravity on the moon, where the astronauts are hopping the way they did, you can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah, because there wasn't a technology where you could like erase the suspension cables and
Not the word.
digitally remaster
That's
some
right.
sort of video.
That's right.
Right. Okay.
So going back just for a minute then
Yeah.
to the Vision Laboratory, that I was able to set up a situation, a set of optical variables, let's call them, a target to look at, illuminated by sunlight in a pitch black background with no light scatter from the surrounding air, because it was a clean room. The only light scatter was in the human eye. And I was able to simulate the way an object would look to an astronaut in space. You might argue that was just for visual realism, but it wasn't. It was to find out if objects are going to be misidentified. That's not good. You don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So I discovered that in the process of studying how the eye and the brain work together, optically and neurologically, I could fool a person. I could set up a situation that they couldn't accurately identify the shape of the target I put up. For instance, an equilateral triangle or would be a circle because of light scatter within the eye. And they'd swear that's a circle out there until you turn the intensity of the sunlight down. Oh, that's a triangle.
Right.
Or a rectangle, like a hot dog, would look like a hot dog with rounded edges and so forth, fatter. They'd say, no, that's just like a big oval, put it like that. No, it's a straight edge rectangle, 4 sides, and so forth.
Right.
So I said to myself, I can explain UFOs. They're just misidentified natural phenomena. I could do that in a laboratory.
And this is the link between
was the
your
turning
scientific
point.
world into the world of.
So I set out as a skeptic to disprove the whole thing, because I had evidence to do it.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and years of knowledge, backing your theory that you could prove that they don't exist.
I could do it.
Yeah.
Until I got honest with myself and started talking with pilots. We had a lot of pilots available to serve as test simulator pilots, call them that. And so we would hire a commercial pilot for a couple hours on a weekend or on his day off or whatever to come in and fly left seat in a 720, B720 simulator I'd fly right seat as co-pilot and handle flaps and gear and all that. And after we were done, almost every time, we'd go back to my office and chat a little bit, and I'd just very casually ask, oh, by the way, have you ever seen anything in your flying career you couldn't identify? And many of them would say, no, never. No, I know what you're talking about. And if I did, I wouldn't tell you anyway. But some of them would. And I heard the most remarkable stories. I could spend hours telling you stories from these pilots. And it forced me to be honest and say, gee, I don't think I was right. That based upon what they told me, when and where they were, and the lighting and the cockpit and all that stuff, I couldn't duplicate that.
And this is also, so some context I'm kind of stealing from our last conversation to put it out there, but this is during a time when if a pilot spoke up and said, hey, I saw something out there, they lose their wings. They don't fly anymore.
Right.
So these people who are coming forward to tell you this information, I mean, they believe this. This is truth.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. But it would all be done confidentially.
Right.
They said if you tell you can't tell anybody, put it that way. So I took the oath, I said I won't, and I haven't.
Right.
I might share some details from their sighting, but not give their name
Yeah,
without
absolutely.
their permission.
Right.
So at any rate, that was my turning point. Those pilots I tested in a simulator at Ames, little by little, were forcing me off this skeptical position into a little more open-mindedness, I think you might say, to say, let the evidence speak for itself. That's the key. If you start imposing your own biases on the phenomenon, you'll see what you want to see, and that's not what's there.
And this goes down to the root of science, just pure objective.
Yeah, let science do its job.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
So anyway, that's the long-winded beginning.
Yeah. Very cool beginning, though. So before we transition fully into the kind of and what do you use for the terminology? UFO has been around forever, but is it UAP? Is it what?
It's UAP.
UAP. Okay.
By the way, I helped coin that.
Did you?
Yeah.
Well, we'll get into that, but I don't want to leave NASA just yet.
Oh, okay.
Because I mean, this is still, at what point in your career is this at NASA when you starting your intriguing branch off with UAPs? How far into your career are you at NASA?
Oh, I would say maybe 8-10 years.
So this is actually relatively early because you
Yeah,
did
it
35 total years with NASA.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, with NASA and also with some contractors afterward.
Right.
I took an early out.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I worked with, I taught at San Jose State for a little while. I worked for Recom Technology with the Research Institute for Advanced Computer Science for a couple of years, and for Raytheon.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, big
And then I
names.
finally retired. We came up here to Whitby.
Right.
Yeah.
So what else were you a part of with NASA? Because you did the Gemini programs, and then you started with Apollo. And if I remember correctly, you worked with the International Space Station as well. What'd you do for the International Station?
Well, I was appointed chief of the Space Human Factors Office, and that was a group of, at the time, about 5 or 6 PhDs working in different aspects of human factors to make the space station habitable. So we had a couple psychologists there and an architect. Maybe you've seen on television a part of the International Space Station, which is a big node of windows. It's a big circle of windows that looks in all directions.
I feel like this is a very famous part of the International Space Station.
Well, I think it is,
Yeah.
because that's where everybody flocks because it has such good visibility.
Sure, okay.
Well, one of the guys in my office designed and has the patent on that.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah,
Okay.
he did a wonderful job.
I hope he took that and retired nicely.
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, so that's space station, but one of our projects was what's called the Proximity Operations Simulator. And we designed and built a full-scale module, 14-foot diameter cylinder, about 25 feet long. At one end was the Proximity Operations Command Center with windows in it, control panels, an image outside that looked, you could bring a shuttle in to rendezvous with you, if you will. Um, we looked at sleep, orientation, like gravitation is a big thing,
Yeah.
and there's no up and down. So what do you do to give the sense of some sense of orientation when you needed to? You float into a new module. There's a lot of modules on that finished vehicle now, space station. How do you orient yourself when you get in the new one?
Yeah.
What's up? What's down? You see?
Something we take for granted.
Yeah, well, that's a psychological issue.
I bet.
And so we had a gal who's a very accomplished clinical I think she's an experimental psychologist who dealt with that issue.
And what was kind of the solution? Like, how do you orient someone?
Well, one of her suggestions that never got used was to put a water line, a horizon line on, if this is up and this is down,
Yep.
then you want a horizon which bisects it.
Yeah. Kind of like a flight gimbal.
Yeah, in a way.
Yeah.
But it's painted. It's just permanent.
Oh.
It's darker and lighter.
Okay.
Earth is darker, sky is lighter.
So that module would have to rotate as the.
No, it always stayed that way.
Okay.
And
Because it
if-
didn't really matter because psychologically is what you're talking about. Gotcha. Interesting.
Yeah.
And that never got implemented?
Never got it. Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay.
No. All four walls, there's within the circle of the capsule, the cylinder, are four flat walls in a square. And because they needed flat spaces to mount all the equipment.
Okay.
I thought it was a good idea myself.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just a sampling of proximity operations.
And there's things on the space station that are still there that you worked on. If I remember, there was a window.
I helped design the window.
Yeah.
I have an article on this, paper on this, NASA article.
I'll put it in the description below. When people are listening and stuff, I'll put it in the descriptions. I'll put some links to some of your work.
If I'd known you're interested, I could have brought a copy to show you.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm sure I can look it up, or if you can, just email me the link to it or the website that I can find it.
Well, if it's available, otherwise it's easier just to load
just
you
hand
the
it.
hard
Okay,
copy.
yeah, absolutely. But you've done a lot of writing. A lot of your stuff is published on both your scientific side and your scientific stuff outside of NASA with the UAP world.
Quite a bit.
Lots of it.
Quite a bit.
Yeah. So I'll make sure I include a bunch of stuff if people want to look more into your work.
Okay. One final point on Windows.
Yeah.
In the process of studying outside the atmosphere vehicles,
Okay.
I learned that the Soviet Union, almost always used a round window. And when you look at the stress dynamics around a circle, the clamping between the panes of glass, the 3 or 4 panes of glass, the stress is evenly distributed. We hardly ever used circles. We always went to an odd shape, triangles or rectangles or whatever, isosceles. And I often wondered about that because just asking for trouble. But we wanted to be different,
And is it still that way?
Still that way.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Take a look next time you see the interior of a space station, for instance.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So at what point, when did you start really focusing on the UAP study and kind of start branching away from aeronautics and all that and kind of making that your primary?
I would estimate about 1975, roughly.
And were you still still contracting, still with NASA?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the two coincided for quite some time.
Quite some time, but I kept a very low profile.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons.
Yeah. This is at the time. I mean, I'm sure this is persona non grata.
Well, not really. A little story there
you
might enjoy. I had written a series of articles for a UFO journal on basically the human factors of doing better measurement from an eyewitness point of view on the ground, because it's usually the man on the street who sees these. He doesn't get anything that's useful scientifically.
Right.
So I did these series of articles and finally got the courage up and wrote them as a book, submitted them, and got them published. But I didn't want to publish a book without the center director knowing about it because I work there, I've never mentioned NASA. You can't do that.
Right.
Um,
Because independent work.
just independent, private work at home.
Right.
And so his name is Dr. Hans Mark. Well, Dr. Mark, um, I met him at lunch one day in the cafeteria. And I happened to just mention briefly, would you be at all willing to take a look at this manuscript I'm working on for a book on the subject of observing UFOs? And he looked at me, and we'd met a couple times before. And he said, sure. So I did. I gave him a copy. And I don't think about a month went by. Never heard a thing. He's a busy guy.
Yeah.
And finally I met him again, and I said, well, can I go ahead with this book? And he said, sure. You have my permission.
Interesting.
I didn't need his permission,
Right.
but I'm glad I got it.
Yeah.
He went on to be the Undersecretary of the Air Force after NASA took him out of NASA Ames. Well, that was an encouragement to me that if he would sprinkle the holy water on this project.
Yeah. Did you guys ever talk in depth about it and kind of get, no?
No.
Okay.
No. I think that would have maybe stretched things a little too far.
Sure. It would have been very interesting, though, to get his take on it.
Well, my point is, I think that I was amazed at how open-minded the NASA folks are.
Yeah.
There were a few skeptics. Just I was originally a skeptic, right?
Yeah.
And so they have their own reasons for being a skeptic. But the majority really were genuinely interested in this subject as a mystery.
Mm-hmm.
That, to me, that's broad-minded. That's what being open-minded. And
Do you think that that's because it's a scientific community, and so that's just another avenue of science to take in? Okay. So the bias of,
right.
the weird stigmas of like extraterrestrials, but it was more of a scientific problem?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point, when did it kind of become like your super passion? Because you have all this work with it. Did it just slowly
Just
escalate over
yeah,
time?
Yeah.
Okay.
The more professional people I met who shared these very private stories with me.
Yeah.
I mean, they could lose their jobs.
Yeah.
If they went public.
Well, and that led you to creating the website.
Well, yeah,
Kind of.
kind of.
When did the
This was before the website, the internet,
Right.
and so we had paper and typewriters to work with.
So all this
No word
documentation,
processors or anything like that.
all of this information is then being compiled via hard copy.
Yeah.
And are you keeping, is there like a special file cabinet, or how is this all organized and maintained by you?
Yeah, good question. I dedicated myself to pilot sightings. That's what I'm known for. And so I developed the world's largest collection of stories from pilots,
Yeah.
collecting as much scientific related data, electromagnetic effects on the plane, for instance, flight path changes as a result of the interaction with the phenomenon, so forth. It's all in 3-ring binders. It's not been digitized.
Still to this day.
Well, there's a project, I donated, these were all up in my attic, right? I donated my files to Rice University in Texas,
Okay.
Houston. So they have the NARCAP files. And I understand that somebody's about to start to digitize.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah,
Okay.
so they'll be available eventually.
Nice. But at the time, I mean, you got to remember, if you're trying to think of a specific story to get a specific piece of data, it's back, it's hard for, say, my generation and probably anyone younger than me. I'm right at that cusp of where I didn't have internet when I was really young, but it came around as I was growing up.
Right.
So it became a part of my life. And I don't really remember before that, but we're talking, you need to know what binder, where in the binder.
Yeah, well, it's chronological.
Okay, so yeah, you definitely have to have a process at that point.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of cases there from almost every country in the world.
Okay, so it was international too.
Oh, absolutely.
Very cool.
Sure. And my earliest case was, I think, 1924. And it was, I think, Kansas. It was on a clear sunny day during a you know what a barnstorming are?
I don't.
Aerodynamic flights, but two bi-wing old-time airplanes, World War I airplanes. This is just after World War One, and a pilot by the name of Bert Acosta was doing stunt flying for a big audience down on the cornfield.
Okay.
And he was up there doing all kinds of neat stuff, apparently. He landed, and he told reporters that while he was up there, he was paced by 3 manhole covers.
That's quite the statement.
Yeah, it is. So anyway, that's my
Yeah.
earliest case.
Okay.
And as I said, I could spend hours
Yeah.
sharing fascinating cases that most people wouldn't want to believe,
Yeah.
because it raises such a serious question of
Yeah.
ET.
Yeah. So at this point, what was your biggest, what was your biggest mind draw? Like being a Christian man, did it mess with your faith a little bit, or make you kind of go like, huh?
No.
Not necessarily like move away, but a different aspect of thinking, okay, well, how does this play into Christianity?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
One has to.
Right.
If you have any integrity at all,
Mm-hmm.
you have to ask that question. And I've been asked that many times.
Yeah. That was my first question for you when I first heard about it. Yeah.
And my answer is very simple and consistent.
I think it's brilliant.
That I believe in God as the ultimate creator of the universe. And the universe is a pretty big place. And that he's infinitely creative. He has to be to get that job done, right?
Yeah.
Infinitely creative. And so he creates life on this planet, which Christians will understand and accept and so forth. And the vast differences in biology, microbiology, nanotechnology, and so forth, right up to dinosaurs, and maybe larger someday. Well, that's just a reflection of his curiosity. And so I simply say, as my firm position, that if God can create that life here on our planet, which we're just beginning to understand, and a nervous system called the brain that does such fantastic things, I'm not going to say he can't do that elsewhere on other planets.
Yeah.
Okay? And so we have a space program, but it's very young. What's about 50 years now? That's young.
Yeah.
And we're going out into we're beyond the solar system now in some of our probes. That he's created life elsewhere because he's creative, and that they have space programs. And they're coming here before we're going there.
Gotcha.
It's probably simple-minded, but it works for me.
Absolutely. And now, when you're learning about all these UAPs, did you ever fear for like the safety of humankind? Did it ever cross your mind that, because a long time the narrative was when everyone talked about UFOs and they're like, it's a danger to society or they're here to hurt us. And then obviously Hollywood took that 10 Ways to Sunday and made all kinds of entertaining movies about being our friends like E.T. versus being our enemies like War of the Worlds and all that kind of stuff. Did any of that cross your mind in those early days, that this might actually be a threat?
No, not in the early days.
Okay.
But I had to approach it later on. I'd say in the last 20 years. I got interested. There's a national organization called SETI, C-E-T-I, Center for Extraterrestrial Interaction or something like that.
Okay.
And a medical doctor, Stephen Greer is his name, is the director. And he came up with this close encounters of the fifth kind concept. And what that really refers, from the definition at least, is human-initiated contact. That a human being on the surface of the planet might be passive and wait till something attracts his attention. Okay, that's not active, and so forth.
Right.
CE5 case is where the person does something deliberately to get their attention and establishes a reply back. And so Stephen Greer kind of coined the term CE5. And I think that he made a real contribution, because up until then, CE1, 2, 3, and 4, that Dr. J. Allen Hynek coined, basically, he's the kind of the father of ufology. Everything was passive up until then. Stephen comes along and makes it an active behavior of human beings, just out of curiosity, for instance. A man is out at night walking his dog. He's got a flashlight. He's in a community, and he sees a light in the sky. So he flashes a code, beep, 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 beep.
Right.
And after a couple seconds, beep, 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 it comes back. A pilot flying along, I've got cases that demonstrate this.
Yeah.
Pilot flying along, an object comes along the right wing, for instance, and so he doesn't know what to do. He's not going to go fly in the direction.
Right.
So what does he do? He wiggles his wings. After a little delay, it wiggles back. That's a CE5.
Gotcha.
So I got interested in that from Stephen's point of view. I appreciate what he's did to begin this process. And I wrote a book. I should have brought a copy. It's called CE5. And I took some time to look at the literature from around the world. And I found like 400 cases. I didn't expect to find hardly any when I started out. Many, many countries have these overt human behavior responses to try to communicate, if you will. And in the process of taking those 400 cases and breaking them up into groups, chapter 1 basically is friendly human behavior. Hi, or a flashlight, as I say. Something that's non-aggressive. And there's, I don't know how many cases. There are good cases in there. The second chapter is aggressive human behavior, shooting a gun.
Right.
A lot of that.
Yeah.
Bows and arrows. A Russian missile from a missile base.
They actually launched on one.
From somewhere in Siberia.
No kidding.
Right. That was the biggest chapter, by the way.
Yeah.
And the question then is, what did it do in return?
Yeah.
Did it shoot back? It's controlling itself, if you will.
Yeah.
There's something important there. That's a statement about human behavior and personality more than anything else.
Right. Because it shows not just an automatic response, it's actually like a thoughtful process.
I took all these cases I found in the literature, and a couple that I had done face-to-face with the witness himself or herself, and I put a limit on it in the sense that I would throw that case out for this book if it was an instantaneous reply back. Now think of this. You're sitting here in this room, and there's a mirror on the far wall. And you take your flashlight and you go beep, 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 and instantaneously you get a reflection back.
Right.
There's no intelligence there. That's physics, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So I have a delay is deliberately put into every single case. There has to be a delay of, I forget, 4 or 5 seconds at minimum.
Okay.
At least. And then the case would be accepted into.
Because then you can eliminate light refraction or simple
right.
simple science.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And what it adds is the word intelligence. And that's really what the book is about. Is there evidence in these 400 cases plus that the phenomenon has intelligence behind it? That's the issue.
Right.
That to me is the key question. Because if there is, it could be a drone, but there's intelligence behind the drone, right?
Yeah.
Somebody elsewhere is driving it, right?
Right.
Well, this back in the days long before drones. Long before.
Yeah,
Now
for sure.
everything's open skate,
Yeah.
free game.
Do you have like kind of a quick sidebar since we talked about drones? Do you kind of have an opinion about all those lights that were over the East Coast for a while? Do you have any reason to believe that this kind of ties into your work, or do you think it's some sort of weird, like just drone program that's doing its own thing?
Let me approach that from two different angles.
Please, yeah.
One angle is the government cover-up and government need for classification.
Meaning the government was doing something and they just just said nothing.
They didn't. That's the best thing to do.
Sure.
Right. Let somebody else take the heat.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one possibility, that it is government, and it's deliberate. They're not going to have ATC, air traffic controllers, spill the beans, or radar. If they should pick them up, they usually don't. They're too small and for other reasons. The second reason, though, is that there's no evidence in my knowledge after this many years of UAP appearing as a drone. not the kind of drones we're talking about.
Right.
You know,
Right.
what amazes me is the size of these drones that were reported,
Yeah.
and the energy required to light up the lights. Takes a lot of battery energy, unless you can microwave it up. I don't
Yeah.
think they were. So bottom line, it's my personal opinion that it was government and it was deliberate with some hobbyists jumping on the bandwagon just for fun.
Gotcha.
And there's, what, 1 million drones out there now? Or
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah.
And so they just caught on. It was fun to do. Why only in Virginia? So what's going on there? And were they doing monitoring of radiation, for instance? Possibility? I don't know.
Yeah. It'll be interesting if anything ever comes to like a solid conclusion with that. And that,
I don't think we will.
yeah.
No,
And this is kind of an argument I have, and not a true argument, but a discussion I have with a lot of people. Generally, it's the people who call for complete transparency. And, you know, I agree. Like, I would love some more transparency, but complete, no. It's not smart. It's not a strategic plan that a strong country can follow. You give away too much information on too many programs, and you backdoor yourself in so many ways.
That's right.
So, you know, I'm not too worried about it. I hear people being like, just tell us. And I'm kind of like, yeah, I would like to know too. So I'd love a little bit. But yeah, complete transparency is not the way to go.
How easy it is to drift into conspiracy theory.
Oh, and that's why people are asking for transparency, because the conspiracy theories start when you don't have answers.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And so we fill in
Yeah.
the way we want it
And
to
we
be.
have some imaginative people in this world.
Yeah, we do. You don't look at chemtrails, for instance.
Yeah.
Same thing. Same thing.
Yeah. So when little conspiracy, or I guess big conspiracies in the chemtrail world, when those come up, do those drive you crazy? Like, do you sit there, or is it literally just like you said earlier, you just don't have time for that? It's not just nonsense.
I don't have time.
Yeah.
Right.
Because I'm sure the flat earthers have, you know.
Like crop circles.
Yeah.
Right.
When you mentioned Kansas earlier, that was the first thing that popped in my head.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And that's all just water off your back. Just don't worry about it.
Well, I can't help myself. I did get interested in crop circles.
Okay.
When that was big time. They kind of really calmed down lately.
Yeah.
But they were reported in like 100 countries. Think about that. Rice paddies of China, for instance. There's something going on that's very significant. And is that a overt response from an ET? I don't think so. You want my opinion on a crop circle?
Yeah.
Okay. What they have in common is that if this is the ground level and here's the plant coming up, right, there's a characteristic distance from the ground level to where the bend occurs,
Okay.
where they start falling over, as well as the direction that they fall. And these crop diagrams, because they're not just circles, they're very complex.
Yeah.
This distance, I think, is significant. I think it's done by a world technology, not ET, using basically, you know what a raster scan is?
I think so. The way you're moving your finger, it's kind of confirming.
Yeah, the old television sets was a raster.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it would paint a series of dots and then zip over and another series of dots and do that 30 times a second over the whole screen. So you
Right.
get motion. A fast walker is?
I don't.
Well, that's a military term for a low altitude surveillance satellite.
Okay.
Very fast, but very low,
Okay.
and a very high resolution. I mean, you can read license plates
Gotcha.
and so forth. I think it's a satellite, a fast walker, with this special raster scan emitter that while they have maybe 10 seconds, 12, 15 seconds, that's another thing you look at is how long does it take for one of these complex diagrams to develop, right? And people have looked at that. Some friends of mine in England have spent quite a bit of time doing that. That length really represents, let's say it's 20 seconds. I'm making that up now. That's the time that the satellite is from starting his project to passing over it to ending the project. And the whole thing's got to be done in that amount of time.
Right.
Okay. Then it's the size and shape and so forth of the pattern that's being produced, that a very high resolution, small diameter beam, probably a microwave, although I don't know what the energy really is, the wavelength, does a raster scan during this for 20 seconds using a pre-programmed computer either on board or sent up, basically, to create this outside. And so what? The Earth has a different dielectric constant, so that the energy comes down, hits the ground, and as it hits the ground, it reflects based upon its wavelength, causing this change in structure, genetic, organic structure, I guess you might say.
Yeah.
And the amount of energy emitted might go halfway or a third way and so forth. You see how complex this can be.
Absolutely.
So now the satellite's gone out of sight. It's gone on its duty somewhere else. You have this finished product, if you will. And the big question is, who's doing it and why?
Yeah, that's what was my next question.
Are they giving away technology? Are they?
Or maybe they're testing it, you know,
Or
like
just-
their early phases of like 3D printing, you know, from space.
If you were a major power and you had this technology, why would you do it?
Yeah.
What would you say?
Oof. You know, I've never thought about it. So on the spot, why would I would have to say it would be like a social experiment to see how people react, maybe.
Okay, good,
Yeah.
good. That's a good possibility. How about to show off your technology?
Oh, kind of flex on people. Be like, look what I can do. Yeah, I could see that.
There have been, I don't know how many images. I have a library at home of some of them, and they're just spectacular. Do you know what a halftone print is in printing?
I could kind of deduce. I mean,
Yeah, well, old newspapers would publish a photograph in halftone of little dots
yeah.
of different sizes and so forth, with spaces in between them of white paper. And the eye integrates that into one image,
Okay.
called a photograph, right? That's called a halftone. Well, that halftone technology can be used in this laying out of a pattern with raster principle, with a fast enough computer driving it and enough power on board. That's the issue. Where does it get the electrical power
Yeah,
to do this?
absolutely.
Now, maybe 20 seconds of power isn't very much, if that's all you have to do. I'm talking too much.
No, I love it. This is fascinating because that's the most logical way I've ever heard crop signs or crop circles ever explained.
Well, I'm probably wrong.
Well, yeah, but at least there's an intelligent answer. Like everything I heard was like farmers with pieces of wood and string going out and like in the middle of the night, you know, breaking down their own farms to attract attention and
right.
yeah.
Yeah, that would be wonderful if it was true.
Yeah.
I don't, and it probably is true once in a while.
Yeah.
You know.
They did a documentary where they actually hired people to do it and try to create a crop circle in X amount of time.
You get it?
And it was fascinating. Like their end result was very impressive, but the amount of manpower and coordination and everything they had to do, it almost disproved itself.
Right.
And I watched it and was like, okay, so they don't do, you could do that, but that's not how it happens.
Takes a huge amount of time and energy and manpower. And
Because the
motivation.
preciseness of these circles is the key.
Yeah, that's another thing that I looked at in this collection of diagrams, or whatever you want to call them. They're diagrams, I guess. What is the dimension of the narrowest swath of cutting of this drawing over?
Right. Okay.
You know what it is? About 2.5 centimeters.
2.5 centimeters.
Yes, that's the smallest.
Oh, yeah.
That
And-
tells me the wavelength.
Right.
That says wavelength.
So, and you're not going to human create anything that's 2.5 centimeters that you can employ without breaking the structures around it. Like, how do you do that? Right. It's not like you're wearing ice skates and kind of skating through the.
Yeah, right.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, this is all incredibly fascinating. And this is such a big topic with UAPs, and then it starts to get into ETs. So, have you done any studying on actual ET stuff, like the extraterrestrial, like beings, or has it stayed mostly on the science and physics
I was
of
afraid
the.
you were going to ask that. Yeah. Yes, I have. I'm a hypnotherapist.
Okay.
I do hypnosis. Clinical. I don't do clinical. I do research hypnosis, which is quite different. A clinical psychologist will use hypnosis for emotion control and anxiety control and stopping smoking and
Right.
whatever, drinking and abusing your wife and so forth. A research hypnosis is quite different because the objectives of what I'm looking for are very different. Um, and so I guess to make a long story short, I've kept this pretty quiet most of my life.
Okay.
And
Well, you don't
only-
have to disclose anything. I was just
Oh,
curious.
Only reason, I'll just give you enough to tantalize.
Okay.
I gave a series of classes to others who wanted to do similar kind of research hypnosis down in San Francisco many years ago for many years, and trained a group of people who, I don't know what their real motivation was. It wasn't to make money, because you don't make money doing this sort of thing.
Right.
But I used a low light level television camera, which I had, and put a person who was volunteering now under hypnosis using a particular relaxation procedure and depth of trance tests, which you have to do. I put you know what a stereo microphone is, okay? A condenser mic.
Yeah.
I put one condenser mic right here on their chest, about there, and another one suspended out in front of their lips, maybe 3 inches or 4 inches. But they're out. I mean, they're just, they're asleep, so to speak, eyes closed. And I would go through a procedure I developed called the 3-stage technique, which basically is a way to try to control bias introduced by the investigator. The person to volunteer to go through this had to agree to a witness on their behalf being present, and I had to agree to a witness on my behalf being present. Always 4 people. So there's the patient, me, and 2 others.
Right. We call it two-person integrity, but it's two-person integrity on both sides of the experiment.
It's got to be,
Right.
for legal reasons.
For sure.
Right, and moral and ethical reasons,
Right.
too.
Yeah.
So that if something came up later on of a misinterpretation of something, the patient, the client's a better word, could go to their witness on their behalf to try to clarify things, and I'd have someone on my side. Plus, we have all the recordings and so forth. Well, recording everything, I was looking for facial changes under emotional states and so forth. I developed this 3-stage approach, which I think did a pretty good job of eliminating my bias, how I introduce a subject to the client, for instance, who comes in with this weird story about being abducted some night out of bed or something. How I deal with that emotionally myself is transmitted to the client. And so I want to get rid of that.
Even
Take
if
me
it's
out of the
even if it's a micro bias, it's still a bias.
It's still a bias.
Right.
And it's a criticism that hypnosis has had facing it from the very beginning. Because investigators are so ego-bound, they want to get right to the subject and start pushing the client to say something that they want to hear.
Right.
That's bias.
Yeah.
So this technique that I used basically does away with that.
Okay.
I won't go into the details.
Okay.
I investigated about over 40 people.
And these are all these subjects or the clients that you're investigating. Are these people who have claimed to had
Everyone.
extraterrestrial experiences?
Everyone.
Okay.
Everyone. And some of they'll just knock your socks off.
Yeah. And what did your research uncover?
Well, I'm a researcher and I'm concerned about methodology. So I shared this method that I'm describing here a little bit with my peers who are out there doing clinical work and experimental work. And if they want to use it, they can. Some do, some don't. I'm just trying to raise the quality of the research
Absolutely.
so that bias is not really an issue. then what you're left with is a residue of what the person says, plus the emotional component. And are you going to accept it or not?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, some of these are really weird stories. And I'm not going to go any further than
No,
that.
you're good. But I mean, at least what that's doing for me is it just has me talking to you here and maybe people listening too. But there are people trying to unbiasedly figure things out, because what you're talking about, you can't fake it, especially under a state of hypnosis, which I'll be honest with you, I've never really fully believed in, but I've seen things that make me go like, oh, maybe it is real, right? But in the state of hypnosis, you can't fake emotions. You can't.
Not if if you are sufficiently deep trance.
Right.
Right. I agree with that statement.
Right. And so what you're doing is creating the most pure, I mean, maybe someone can purify it a little bit more, but you can't, you know, when someone tells a story, or you see, better yet, when you see people fake being hypnotized, you can see it. You can see it immediately when someone like kind of falls down, but their face moves, or an emotion comes out, or if it's over dramatic. Right. So that, to me, what I see is like a refined process to try to get some real science out of something that's very questionable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
I remember one case, a woman, she went into the depth, quite a good deepness, a deep level of trance, I should say, and passed all of the depth of trance tests you're supposed to do to kind of prove it. And I asked her questions about her experience later on in this 3-stage approach. The 3rd stage is where I actually say something to her. The first 2, I'm not even there. She's just repeating something by memory, just emphasizing what she heard, what she saw in her eyes, and sometimes what she said. And I just start her talking, or him talking, and I don't say a word for half hour. I don't break in with, because I'm curious about something, to clarify.
No, just let it flow.
I don't, just let it go.
Yeah.
Do it the second time, but I add in a couple components, sensory components, like what did you think? And in other words, what you replied to him or her, if there was a being there. And another half hour goes by, I'm quiet. Now I have 2 parallel accounts that I can look at in time and order, because some of them might be a little out of order for some reason. Okay. The 3rd time, I go along with the person. I say, I'm going to ask you to do this one more time, but this time I'll be beside you and we can talk about it as we go through it. And that's what most hypnotists do at first, and you get all kinds of bias in there, you see. But now I've heard the story 2 times before, and I know what questions to ask, and how to phrase them emotionally. Sometimes you need emotion, sometimes you don't. And then you have a 3rd narration, but you're now introducing your own curiosity into it.
Sure.
Okay, that's the 3-stage.
Okay.
I was asking this woman a question, and it was an emotional related question. And the microphone down here to her answer she gave me was no. The answer I got on this microphone was yes.
That's weird.
I think that my interpretation of that event was that she was rehearsing her answer. Could she live with the emotional consequences of saying yes when she knew it was no? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Interesting. That's my take, but I could be wrong on that.
Okay.
I don't know.
But
this is research hypnosis.
Sure. But based off the method that you used, I mean, you're at least getting data that could support the counter argument. Like, this person could be rock solid, but subconsciously they're letting on certain tells that they might say differently, or might prove it, I guess.
I wish they could be proven that you're right.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we can yet.
Okay.
Consciousness is so complex. I don't begin to understand it. I wish I did.
Yeah.
Now we're getting into the spirit realm,
right, which
is really very important here. I've been asked many times, which end of the spectrum are you really on in your UAP work? Are you at the ET end or the nuts and bolts end? In other words, the psychic end, the mental reconstruction end versus the nuts and bolts, put it that way. And I say, allow me to have the privilege of staying somewhere along the middle of that continuum, so that as from a research point of view, the data will drive me in one direction or the other. And so far, that's worked, keeping that flexibility. Because some of my colleagues have they love the nuts and bolts end. These are actually visitors from outer space, flying in little metallic craft with instrument panels like an F-18 and so forth. They love that. They feel good about that.
Yeah.
And I have other colleagues way out here in the spiritual end, that this is God speaking to you. This is a vision from some realm or Satan or something. I'm not going to get caught up in that.
Yeah.
I'm too old for that. I want some flexibility in there.
Yeah.
That make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, then to me, that takes a middle ground of you're listening to your research and you're avoiding all the biases that you can put into your
I'm
research.
trying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
I probably.
And it's got to be incredibly difficult to do too.
Well,
Because sometimes you probably hear something that pushes you in one direction and maybe you hear something that's like completely pushes you in the other.
yeah, yeah.
That's crazy.
I meet quite a number of people, Christians, I should say, that believe in their heart that this is Satan and a deception.
Yeah.
That this ET image is a mental construct from Satan to distract you or pull you away from your faith. And I have to be very honest with them and say, I've talked to a lot of people, and they say that on the basis of a bias. I don't know where they get the bias, maybe the Bible or something. And they're entitled to that bias. I don't have that bias. When shot at, they don't shoot back. If I were Satan, I'd be shooting back. Just wiping them out, because that's his objective, is to kill people, one way or another.
It definitely brings up some very interesting and very complex questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Does Bible speak of UAP?
Not that I'm aware of.
Oh, I do.
Oh.
First 2 chapters of Ezekiel. Read Ezekiel.
I'm going to
in the
have
Old-
to.
Oh, yeah.
No kidding.
It's there.
Okay.
That's one of the best CE1 stories you're ever going to read,
No kidding.
from Ezekiel, chapter 1 and 2.
Okay. Well, you just gave me my nightly reading tonight.
Okay. Yeah, and in Matthew chapter 24, Jesus is explaining to his disciples, what be the signs of my return? That's one of the questions he's answering that they've asked him. He's on Mount of Olives the night before he's going to be crucified the next day. And he says that not one stone's going to remain upon another in Jerusalem. That's quite a different question. That's not the end times. Well, it was for the people at the time, because the Romans were going to tear the place down in 70 AD. But one of the things he says, besides earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, wars and rumors of war, is strange sights in the sky.
Really?
And if that isn't what a UAP is, I don't know what is.
Right.
So people say, okay, that's evidence that it's a very old phenomenon, because Jesus is talking about it 2,000 years ago. And it's spiritual, because he's talking about it as a part of his end time signs and so forth. Well, I'm not going to say they're wrong, because I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think they're visitors with a space program.
Yeah. And I mean, you've caught some on film and you brought some for us. We got some pictures here. I'm going to pull one. We'll pull these out.
Yeah, okay.
And I'll make sure that, anyone watching along, if you're not watching along, you're going to miss out. But you got 2 here, and I'll make sure these go up on the screen. So this one right here, when you were describing this one to me, like, walk me through this one, because I believe I've seen this one before. This is a very famous photo, is it not? Or something similar to this, I won't want to say.
If you've read this article in the Journal for UFO Studies, This is a journal that is published out of Chicago by the Center for UFO Studies.
Okay.
And I don't remember the year I did this article, but it's quite some time ago. I was speaking at a conference in Europe quite some time ago. Let's see if there's a date on this.
I got your chapter
Photograph here.
pulled up here.
No, this photograph was taken in May 23rd, 1971. I believe that photographic evidence, as long as it's not digital, this is camera. I've done down to the grain size analysis of these things. As long as it's film that developed in a bath of chemicals and so forth,
Right.
is far better from a evidential point of view than digital. So I will not waste my time on a digital photograph.
Right. Too
Not
easy
anymore.
to skew and edit.
Photoshop.
Yeah.
Forget it. It's not
Yeah.
worth it. There's just too many very talented people out there with virtual reality.
And who knows what AI can pump out now.
So anyway, this husband and wife, Rudy, it was his first name. I was in a conference in Europe, and I had a chance to go to Germany and meet this gentleman who took this photograph.
Okay.
He and his wife had rented a car, and they were on vacation in the Austrian Alps. And he had I think it was an AGFA camera. It says on there.
It does. Yep.
AGFA?
Yep.
Okay.
Click 1 was the
All right.
model.
And his wife saw this object flashing in the sky. It was hovering, it kept reflecting sunlight, I think. She saw it first and pointed it out to Rudy, who's driving the car. And he kind of looked up, and he didn't know what it was. It could have been a bird or something. So he pulled off the gravel road. It wasn't a paved road. Got out, went to the back seat of his car, he told me, and took his camera was there with a new roll of film in it, 12 exposures in it. That hasn't taken any photographs before that. And he took a picture of this thing. And he's told me that the object hovered for like 10 seconds, and then it moved so fast, it was over here. And then it stopped at a different orientation, attitude. And then he fortunately found it up there and took another picture of it, handheld camera.
Yeah.
Right? And then took another picture, 12 times.
Yeah.
Now he's running out of he's out of film. the camera's empty, right? And he's got these images as proof. His wife was scared. She was pregnant at the time. And he was concerned for her. She was getting a little worried it might come down. Well, I met Rudy. He told me the story, and he showed me some little photographs that the drugstore had made from his negatives, basically. And immediately I said to myself, this is a good case. I want to look into this. Would you be willing to loan me your camera? I'll take it back to America. I'll guarantee you'll get it back in the same condition.
Yeah.
Would you loan me the negatives? I don't need prints. I'll do that myself.
Right.
But negatives. And he said, sure. He sent me everything. Now, if you're going to hoax this, that's not what you do.
Right. It's too much stuff to fake, especially with the technology
That's right,
back then.
exactly,
Yeah.
if you know anything about photography.
Yeah.
So this is one of 12 pictures that I have here. And this article that I wrote for the journal
Yep, I got it.
has other
Lots of other
other
pictures.
enlargements
Yeah.
of the same object, he said. Well, some German scientists jumped on him. They just don't believe in this, and they wanted to disprove him. And so I had to research the German objections. It was like a court of law, where you're looking at both sides of the issue and so forth. I came to the conclusion he's telling the truth. And as important as that was, and that is very important, I was really concerned about what can we learn from the images. And so I used a computer program. This was done back in the computer days now,
Yeah.
coming online, to, I think they call it convolving the image, devolving, contour. It takes these 11 or 12 shaped images in the sky background and collapses them down into one single geometric shape,
Which you have outlined
which
right
is
here.
right there.
Yep.
That's
And I'll
right.
make sure this goes up because that's fascinating.
It is, because it's not your typical flying saucer,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
It's more like a NASA re-entry vehicle.
And you know what? For the people who aren't watching, I'm going to do my best. And so maybe you'll laugh at this, but to me, I mean, the flat bottom with the kind of the arched top, you kind of have a saucer shape to it. But from a top down view, it looks like a fat candy corn.
Yes, it does. You're right.
So for anyone who's not watching or doesn't take the time to check out the pictures I put up, it has a flat bottom and kind of a rounded dome top, very elongated dome. So it's not a very exaggerated. But from the top looking down, it looks like a fat candy corn.
Right. That's right.
Which is absolutely atypical from standard belief of what a quote unquote UFO would look like.
So what do you think it is?
Gosh, I mean, when I'm looking at this and this being a film camera and everything you're saying and looking, the fact that he was able to get 12 exposures from different angles and put this in there, that is extremely compelling. There's and from an outsider looking in, I have no reason to doubt it, right? And how do you fake film photography when you have the negatives and the camera itself? That's extremely compelling.
Yeah. Well, one of the German arguments against the case, that it was a hoax, was he threw an object up in the sky and photographed it.
See, and you couldn't get the resolution to match. The resolution would never match.
Okay, there you go.
In my opinion, right? From the little I know about photography, if you threw something up, the background resolution and the foreground resolution would be completely distorted. You'd have two separate images on two different planes.
Okay.
And this is not.
Okay. Yeah, every camera has what's called a hyperfocal distance. And just by definition, it's a physical term. Depending on the f-stop of the lens and the distance to the object, if the object is closer than that minimum distance, it'll be blurred. But everything beyond that distance will be in focus. So I studied the hyperfocal distance of the little Agfa camera, because I had the camera right there.
Right.
This object, in fact, there's a diagram in the article.
Is there? Okay.
That tries to do a three-dimensional reconstruction of where the object really was, using background and cloud structure and
Okay.
mountaintops in the horizon and so forth. They're up near the top of a tall mountain, by the way, but there are some other mountains visible. You can see some of them in the article here.
And I mean, you even dissected the camera on like a rudimentary plane so that people could understand this.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, this is very cool.
Yeah.
And so it came back with proof versus.
Science is science.
Yeah.
You know? It's like saying, is COVID. I don't want to get into that.
I was going to say, let's not.
Right.
But man, this is so in the world of UAP, information gathering. This is this case, does this rank up there on like one of the most?
No.
Not
No,
okay.
because it's European, it never really caught on in America. So if you have that article, you might be interested in it.
Right. Okay.
No, I have another photograph I could bring from British Columbia, which is really, it's been in a Time Life series.
Okay.
And I spent almost a week up in British Columbia with my dad, who's a surveyor at the time, literally spending time with the photographer and her husband and their little Jessica, their daughter, reconstructing the event 1 year later.
Oh, no kidding.
Sun angle exactly the same, weather the same.
Right. That's why you did it 1 year later to get.
Right.
Okay.
We spent a year there. We took a camper up and just camped in this place.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I mean, that's dedication.
It's a hobby. Well, it's a fun hobby, you know.
Yeah. And now the second picture you have here, this one's fascinating. It's got an interesting story, but what the punchline of the story is what's fascinating.
Okay.
So
tell me what it is.
well, so yeah, right. Yeah. Looking at this thing for people who aren't watching, it's like a colorful piece of spaghetti, There's just this crazy line. It looks like if you gave a kid a crayon and it just took one single, like one press on the wall, right? So not like multiple scribbles, but one press on the wall to draw this crazy loopy diagram.
Okay.
But it's on a transparent piece of paper. I'm going to do my best to get the image up on the podcast and so
Sure.
people could see this. But the crazy thing about it is the light variations. And you and
Color.
the color. Because this,
You notice the width of the line is constant.
right.
That means it's the same light source.
Okay. And there are what I'm going to call not like light blurs. Like it does appear to be greater in nature and certain, but it's always with the same color. So is that a spectrum? It's how the camera actually took in that wavelength of light. So it changes that. Because the greens and blues are all the same.
Right.
But when you get into kind of the whites and reds, it kind of blurs out a little. If this is a fascinating image, can you please, for the people listening, describe what this picture is?
Sure. That picture was taken in Florida one night with 3 people present. And I think her name was Brenda. I'm pretty sure it was Brenda's camera. This is all by memory, a long time ago now. There'd been quite a spate of sightings in Florida, so that they were out one clear night, just neighbors basically. They weren't related, and each one had a camera. No, 2 of them had a camera, one didn't. And I'm pretty sure that Brenda, this was her camera, a 35 millimeter, and a light showed up in the sky, but she wasn't familiar with the camera, and she had incorrectly set the exposure so that the shutter stayed open.
Yeah, the aperture.
The aperture stayed open too long. It was trying to compensate for the black background, so you want a longer exposure, right?
Right.
Well, his handheld camera, which is horrible for photography for this sort of thing, because you get blur and motion, as you can see here. The object was stationary, she said, but this is she didn't say stationary. She said, I moved the camera around to kind of track it as it moved a little bit. And what it did was smear that point source image, what her eye said, over the negative of the film.
Right.
Right? Producing this image right here.
So this is one very long exposure of a
Yes.
single entity.
I think it was like 2 seconds.
Oh, so that's not even that long at all.
Okay, all right.
Well, I mean, that's a long time in camera world. You had an aperture to stay open for 2 seconds. It takes in a lot.
Look at it's so long ago. Don't quote me on 2 seconds.
Sure. Yeah. But
Even let's say it's 6 seconds. It
Sure.
doesn't matter. What matters is what showed up.
yeah.
Which is a pulsation, if you will. Not a pulsation because there's hardly any black spots in between. That could have been a pulse there and there, where it goes black
Right.
and it shows up somewhere else. I don't think so. I think light just went out.
And to her account, there were no alternating lights.
No. It
Right.
was
So
a
her eye was only seeing one solid light.
white light.
Yeah.
It's white right here.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that was what was fascinating when you first showed me this picture is when someone says all I saw was a white
Me
light,
too.
and then all of a sudden you see this color noodle, right? That says some things.
What does it say to you?
Well, there's wavelengths that we're not seeing with our eyes
Okay.
that are being picked up because you're relying on technology,
Yes.
and so that technology is
It's an important picture.
absolutely.
It suggests that we don't see our eye-brain combination is misleading us sometimes.
Sure.
Otherwise, we'd see that.
Right. Well, also, there's very few things in nature that change light wavelength, very few. And if we're talking about something that's up in the sky, I don't know of any, and I could be completely wrong because I'm not any sort of scientist, but I don't know of any that would give off different wavelengths, over time.
No, not the breadth of these wavelengths.
No,
red to blue.
Right.
I don't think so.
And it's the whole spectrum, the entire spectrum.
You can get some spectral differences from stars coming through the atmosphere
Okay.
with pollution or water content or whatever.
Right. Okay.
Between your eye, the camera, and the object out there. But this we don't know how far this was away. Um, I said there was a second person there with a camera.
Just going to ask you, did you by chance?
He had his 35 millimeter, and he took another picture of it, and you should see it. It's fantastic.
And it's a clean still shot?
Yes, he had a proper setting in his
Yeah.
exposure.
Yeah.
Right. Gulf Breeze, Florida.
Okay.
That's where this happened. A friend of mine went down there. He passed away now. He's a physicist, optical physicist. And he did quite a bit of work in Gulf Breeze because it was happening so many nights in a row. He got time to fly there from Virginia.
And to witness it personally?
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So
I interviewed these folks and so forth.
Do you know how many nights in a row it was that this was going on? Nah. But
No,
obviously
you can
several
look in
if
the
you have time to
history
fly
books
there.
Just look in the history books under Gulf Breeze, Florida, and it's there.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
And
insane.
That's where this comes from.
Okay. Man.
It's fascinating.
Super fast. Yeah.
Do you know of any light source that you can buy off the shelf that can modulate wavelength like this? I don't.
I don't either. Not in,
Lasers are red, green,
Yeah.
blue, whatever.
yeah.
Very fine wavelength, just
Yeah.
one or two frequencies, right?
Right.
This is modulating over the whole spectrum.
Because we have technologies, in a very rudimentary state, like a headlamp that can switch between white light and red light.
Yeah.
So you can have different lenses that can but it's not as quick or deliberate as what we're looking at here. I don't know of anything that just modulates between those because there's no human need for that. Not that I'm aware of.
So does this suggest ET?
To me, it definitely suggests it, and then I guess those are the lines, like the steps. Suggestion, absolutely. Does it prove it? No, unfortunately, right?
Yeah.
But suggestion, big time. Yeah, if you understand, if you look into the basics of,
Yeah, that's what we're talking about, science.
yeah,
We're trying to take pieces of the puzzle. We don't know what the finished picture looks like of the puzzle, and put these little pieces together, right? Well, these are just two of zillion pieces. Is mankind being presented those pieces from somewhere else to initiate us into something?
big questions.
Yeah.
And because the way,
Yeah, how philosophical you get on this.
yeah, right. But to me, it's funny to have you say like all these little bits and pieces, because we were talking about the resolution earlier, what is it, half resolution you talked about, and like each one of these is a spot.
Right.
And if you zoom way out, maybe someday we're gonna have the whole picture, and it's
Maybe
gonna
so.
maybe right, who knows, or maybe we're spinning our own wheels off something.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Is this an initiation into Christianity, for instance? Now, Rudy Negora, who took that picture, and then 11 others, by the way, I don't know if he's a Christian or not.
Okay.
I don't
So you
know.
don't know how this
No.
experience impacted
That's
him
not
necessarily?
a question you ask from a scientific point
Right.
of view.
Right.
That's a sociological, psychological, spiritual, religious kind of a thing. Anyway, well, I thought you'd enjoy these.
Big time. These are great, and I hope I can get them up scanned appropriately to get the best resolution into.
Sure. Well, feel free to take it out of this frame. If you
Okay.
need to.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Do you have a scanner?
I do. I'll handle it with extreme care and make sure you get it back. But I think the people watching would love this. And
You think?
oh yeah, because just we can talk about it, right? But when you present this picture to 10 other people, you're going to get 10 other opinions.
I hope so.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd
And that's
love
the
to know
beauty
what
of
they
it.
are.
Yeah. Well, if people see it, we'll see how many people I can get tuned in, and there's like marketing and social media tactics and all that. But I would love to get this episode out there to as many people, and especially not my friends and family, only in the sense that, people I've never met. It's always good to get those opinions. I can semi-predict what my family's gonna say and my friends, because I've known them for so many years. So you understand the human mind. But anyone out there, if you want to drop comments down below in the YouTube channel, or send messages, I'll make sure Dick gets them, and we can have a good conversation and maybe a laugh. Right?
Yeah, I would be very interested in the comments.
Well, you've had such a phenomenal career, and career life is what I meant to say. I mean, 35 years with, not directly with NASA, but some parts were and some parts are contracting. You've been doing decades of research on UAPs. And I mean, you're a wonderful human being, and you've always been so kind to me. So it was an absolute pleasure. Is there anything you want to dive into a little bit before we kind of wrap things up? Is there anything I've missed? Like, I get so tied into these because these are such good, good stories. Like,
Yeah, I think I would like to wrap it up with a comment on NARCAP,
okay,
the National Aviation Reporting Center on
yes,
Anomalous Phenomena. It's a big name.
I touched on this early, but I kind of missed the mark on the time frame. So please, yeah,
It's been my opinion that those of us in America, particularly, who are interested in this subject of UAP, um, have been doing it on a hobby basis. Nobody's getting paid to do any of this.
yeah,
It's all volunteer work, and it takes a lot of time and energy and compulsiveness and so forth. It occurred to me back in about 1999, actually, that to turn the corner to make UAP research valuable to the society, we should be doing things that value society. Well, aviation safety, flight safety is one of those areas. And so I worked with a younger man, Ted Rowe is his name, to put together an organization and a website and a reporting center for pilots so that they could send in their reports to us confidentially. We guarantee that so that their boss wouldn't hear about it. And we would collect higher quality data because it's coming from the aviation community. But this includes air traffic controllers with radar behind them on the ground, not just pilots in the air. And that organization has collected some interesting stories. But it was a way to show other organizations, like the Center for UFO Studies in Chicago, or MUFON is another, there's a number of them in America, that they ought to do likewise, that they should find ways to contribute their research to a betterment of society. We're trying to save lives flying on airplanes, right?
right.
By what we're learning about the phenomenon, what to do and what not to do. You don't shoot at them.
I was just gonna say, like, shoot at them.
Don't shoot at them. No, right. And so we have a I had to retire because of age and other reasons from NARCAP about 3 or 4 years ago. Ted is carrying the work on. I was chief scientist for the organization, but we have a website, and narcap.org.
I'll put the link up for everyone.
Yeah,
for sure.
Okay, because we publish everything. We're not hiding a thing.
Yeah,
And we want to make a contribution to the aviation world, not just in America, but the world. And the idea for NARCAP caught on. And now there's a German NARCAP Germany. And there's a Chilean, NARCAP Chile, in South America, because they have active interest in this same subject and saw the value of what we were doing. We would hope that idea would catch on, if you will, so that other countries would come along and do the same thing. And we could put some political pressure on ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO. They're in Montreal. They're governing all kinds of international aviation standards, runway length and lighting and communication frequencies and all that sort of stuff.
okay.
Put a little pressure on them to take this seriously and to stop browbeating. I'll tell you one more story.
You could tell as many stories as you want. These are fascinating.
We had this senior captain. I can't tell you the airline he was flying for, who was left seat. He and his wife went on a trip one summer to Area 51. You know where that is?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Okay. Do your viewers know where it is?
I mean, I think everybody, like, growing up in the modern times, like, Area 51 has kind of been a cartoon version of reality, right? Because everyone thinks that the UFO is just the science
that's
center.
where they are.
Yeah,
right?
right. Everyone just thinks like, oh, we got this big, and there are some very, very top secret, very big study facilities at Area 51.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I've learned something.
Oh yeah. So I had the opportunity to go to Area 51, not in a sense of like this, right? And Area 52, because Area 52 is a very big weapons testing facility.
Is it?
Yeah, they've tested a lot of like chemical weapons, and there's remnants, and there's a lot of really cool stuff. I spent a lot of time at Area 52.
Is Area 52 next to 51? Is that why it's
You
numbered
know,
that way?
I've never actually asked myself that. They're not located within like a general proximity, but maybe that's just kind of how they just went doot, 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 doot.
I see. Is it on Google Maps?
Yeah. You can
You're
Google
kidding.
that stuff. Yeah.
Really?
Yep.
Okay. I have to look that up.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's and his wife are driving along the highway down there outside the security fence, and they stop at this little alien inn. It's a cafe. It's got a big reputation. This is where all the UFO people go, right? And it's a tourist trap. And so as a souvenir, he told me, he bought a little wallet card about this big, it's official. It has a picture on it, by the way, but it looked pretty official. Some UFO-related support or organization or something. He put it in his wallet, forgot about it. And so he's on this long nonstop flight across the country, I think it was. He's got this younger guy in the right seat, kind of a fresh out first officer. And they're on autopilot, so, plenty of time to spare, and he's, just relaxing and so forth. And he just happens to remember this. I don't know how they got on the subject, but he remembers the card in his wallet. So he gets his wallet out, pulls the card out, and hands it across to this young man over here. Okay, and then apparently they have some talk. He didn't go into too much detail, but the young man hands it back, and he puts it away, and he forgets about it. They land the airplane, and his chief test pilot contacts him right away and says, "You're scheduled to see our psychiatrist."
Just threw him under the bus or under the plane, I guess we will. Yeah.
Side door, yeah.
Yeah, that's terrible because it's obvious like a gimmick or a novelty item, not a gimmick, but
Well, it's bias. It's a terrible bias.
But the little card, I mean, I'm sure it came out of a booth or some sort of little fun, little interactive thing, right?
I've never been there. I don't know.
Because, I mean, I used to have a shirt that had a little glow-in-the-dark alien on it that said
that-
Area 52 from when I was there.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It was this really cool shirt, and it ended up wearing out really fast, and all the glow paint fell off. It was a cheap shirt, right? But I mean, it's just weird little knickknacks you pick up. We could have bought UFOs and weird little things. So
Would the Navy have kicked you out?
No, definitely not, But to have someone take that professionally, but that's exactly the need for NARCAP. That's exactly
That's right.
Because you're eliminating that stigma of people getting their wings pulled and, the biased opinion of like, oh, you're crazy right off the bat. Right. And so that's really cool that NARCAP's still up going and you're promoting it. And so, and you said your friend Ted still got it up and running. Mm-hmm. Very cool.
Yep.
Well, Dick, it's been awesome.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this was great. And all this information, guys listening or watching, either way, I'm going to put Dick's everything I can find to link. All the stuff will be in below in YouTube. I'll try to put links all over the Instagram stuff. And just to kind of push it far and wide, let people look at it, see the work you've done, and also hopefully to intrigue them to keep putting interest into what you're talking about with NARCAP and putting pressure on the flight administrations to look at it objectively and scientifically versus emotionally or spiritually. I think that's huge.
Well, that's a whole nother dimension that we need to get into maybe.
Yeah.
Another time.
Sure. Well, it's been a pleasure today.
Thank you for your time.
Absolutely, brother. I can't wait to put this up and to get some of the feedback on it. And I'll let you know. I'll keep it feeding your direction.
Okay.
All right, brother.
Great.